over to you, Bahar and Gerhard.
Okay, I think you might as well get started. Can I go ahead and start by introducing myself?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, my name is Bahar Gün. I am the coordinator of IATEFL Teacher Training and Teacher Education Special Interest Group, and I am delighted to be here with you today. Thank you all very much for joining us on a Saturday, and thank you for the huge interest shown to our event. Although the world is going through difficult times again, we are all going through rough times again, and we are all heartbroken because of what is happening in Ukraine. Our Ukrainian friends and colleagues, they are in our thoughts, and we are sincerely hoping that this will be over very, very soon. Despite everything, on a Saturday, you are here with us. We very much appreciate that, and I hope that you will find today's event useful and a professionally rewarding experience. As you can see on the slide, we very rightly set the theme of this event as the 4 pillars of teacher support, because as you will agree, management, education, leadership, and management are so closely related, and it's almost impossible to talk about an effective teacher education program without the right support, proper support from the managers, from the leaders, and without an effective communication between the managers and teacher education program administrators. So because our SIGs are so very closely related, this is actually our second event, I mean, with the current committees, and the first one was very successful too. And Gerhard, I think I am looking at many more joint events to come. Can I say that? Absolutely, yes. Because our SIGs are so very closely related. So okay, today we have an amazing line of speakers. I just wanted to make sure that I have all the names down. We have Sandy Millin, Simon Cox, Lucie Cotterill, Christina Nicole Giannikas, and Clare McGrath with us. Amazing talks are ahead of us. I can't wait to listen to their presentation. And taking this opportunity, I would like to thank the people who were involved in the organization of this event, my fellow committee members, and my friends and colleagues in LAMSIG committee who made this event possible. Thank you very much for all your events. And I would like to say today is the birthday of the coordinator of LAMSIG. Happy birthday, Gerhard.
Thank you.
Wonderful day to celebrate your So enjoy, everyone, enjoy the event, and thank you very much. Thank you. Over to you, Gerhard.
I don't have much to add to what Bahar said. Again, like you said, thank you to the Teacher Training Education SIG for working with us to put this together. I'm going to hand over to Daniel Huang, who's the Managing Director of Inspired CPD, who's the sponsor of the room we're using today to make sure we can fit enough people into it. Unfortunately, because of the time, he's not at home or in the office, so we might not be able to see him. But Daniel, I'm going to give you a few minutes if you just want to got a few. You said you have a few things to say, and then we can get going.
Thank you, Gerard. Apologies for only being able to participate through audio. I'm Daniel. First, I'd like to thank the Teacher Training and Education Special Interest Group and the Leadership and Management Special Interest Group for putting this event together. We also want to thank you for allowing us to be part of the event. We're very, very grateful to be joining the speakers as well as the participants tonight. Well, tonight on my side of the world, which is in Taiwan. I represent Inspired CPD. So we are a training service provider. So I'd like to add that we chose the name Inspired because of our core training values, and they are in service, needs-based, sustained, personalized, integrated, reflective, evaluative, and developmental. So we are very happy to see events like this happening and being part of them as they reflect our very own core values. We are currently in the process of working with IATEFL to offer significant discounts to IATEFL members on our Trinity Cert, our TILEC, and our Trinity Diploma, as well as potentially the IDLTM, and a 1-year membership to all non-IATEFL members. And to those of you who are interested, please contact LAMSIG for further details. So without further ado, I want to wish everyone a very pleasant and fruitful event. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm not sure who's going to introduce Simon, but that means we can get going.
Okay, I can introduce myself. That's perfectly okay.
Well, if you allow me, Simon.
Oh, please, that's
Yeah,
fine.
okay, yeah, right. So Simon is a freelance academic management consultant and teacher trainer who spent the last 10 years of his 25-year ELT career working for a big teacher training center in Shanghai. He's also a trainer and moderator on a wide range of Cambridge and Trinity teacher qualifications. His recent conference presentations and articles have all related to trying to make sense of complex situations. But since, COVID-19 has arrived, he's also spent a lot of time learning how to teach children to ride bicycles. So we are absolutely looking forward to your talk, Simon.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, that's great. Well, it's nice to be here. I'm actually in Bangkok today, so it's 6 o'clock in the evening for me. And one of the great things about this particular event is, as you've heard, I'm a teacher trainer. I'm working as a teacher trainer here, but my other job is as an educational manager, and that's the bit that I'm going to be talking about more today. And maybe, if you're like me, you might take an interest in kind of more general business and management trends that go on around the world, whether this is through things like LinkedIn, or maybe you read the Harvard Business Review, something like that. Because if you do, you've probably heard about the idea of failure. Failure seems to be a very hot topic right now. Silicon Valley is full of people telling you that you need to fail quickly and fail fast and fail first and all of these kind of things. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I look at these things, I think they probably will make great fridge magnets, but they also kind of worry me slightly. Seem a bit macho in a way. But I do want to talk about failure, because failure seems to be an important thing that maybe we don't talk about enough in ELT. I know that in my experience, in my career, we haven't talked about failure enough. And recently, well, relatively recently, I had a failure, quite a big failure, quite an important failure for me. And I thought that this would be the perfect opportunity for me and you, I guess, to make some sense out of it. So that's kind of what I'm talking about today. And the title comes from this thing, which is called The Play That Goes Wrong. I don't know if you've seen it where you are, but in the UK, it's quite popular. It's a TV program as well, actually. And basically, it's a comedy. And the comedy is usually about a theatre genre. So in the one that I saw, it was a Agatha Christie style murder. But when the play begins, everything goes wrong. The acting is terrible. The scripts are terrible. The stage collapses. The sets fall down. The costumes are bad. The director's on stage. Everything is going wrong. And although I was quite entertained by it, as I was watching, I was thinking, actually, you can learn a lot more about theatre from watching it go wrong than you can from watching when it goes right. Because often when theatre is going right, you don't see all of the things that are hidden. It's only when it goes wrong that you see how it works. So I thought, well, maybe if I take that approach today to my language teaching organization, maybe we can learn something about it. So that's kind of the approach I'm going to take to making sense of what happened to me. So very quickly, the outline is quite simple. I'm going to talk about what I think happened in my particular school. I'm going to talk about what went wrong. And I'm going to talk about what we could do about it. And maybe in some ways that's the most important thing in retrospect. Okay, so I don't want to waste time. I'll get on. It's a kind of a case study. So the situation is, this started around 10 years ago, so it's quite a long time. And language teaching organization is often the word we use in management to describe it. And it was good in this case because this particular place was not a school. It was only a teacher training organization. We didn't have any students at all on site. It was a very big teacher training organization in some ways. We worked with lots of people, but the group of core trainers who did the delivery of the work was very small. Also, the actual organization itself was a much, much bigger organization, a big company. And my team, our group of trainers, was a much, much smaller part within that group. And that, in some ways, changed the dynamic of how it worked as a business and how it worked in terms of leadership. Our main job was in-service teacher training for teachers working in the government school system, so mainly primary and junior and senior high school teachers. But we also kind of and we worked on things like, let's see, we had 1,000 candidates per year or more. We provided training, things like TKT and the much missed ICELT that used to be a very important part of our training package, now do different things. Also, it earned quite a lot of money. It's not a secret to say that we earned quite a lot of money. It was quite a good business. But the whole thing was done by a very small group of teachers, of trainers, experienced, capable trainers, but only usually around maybe 8 people. So we did have a problem though. And the problem was this: recruitment and retention. So like I said, the whole thing was very dependent on quite a small group of people. So that meant that we had to make sure that we were very efficient in the way that we delivered our training. And so we only recruited very experienced, well-qualified people. We offered them good package, good salaries, those kind of things. But even then, it's not always easy to hold on to somebody. One of the reasons why is because maybe the particular location we worked in wasn't one that was one that a lot of people wanted to go to. Also, the nature of the work was, well, let's say quite complicated in the way that we worked because we traveled a lot all over the country. We never seemed to be in one place for any more than a few days before we traveled on to somewhere else. And so it was always a little bit difficult to get a sense of the place. The country that I was working in is a challenging one in terms of culture for some people. A lot of people are not familiar with foreigners. So in terms of language and food and lifestyle, things can be quite challenging for a foreigner. Some people found that difficult. Also, an interesting one is that the particular government that we were working with, they had very strict requirements about who they would give a work permit to. And so, although modern ELT is an open-minded and sharing kind of industry, as we can see from all of the people here today, this particular government would only allow trainers to receive a work permit if they came from very specific countries. And in fact, they probably rejected the talent of around 50% of all of the trainers that we could have had. So it was always difficult to get and to retain trainers. We did some things to try and make it better, but it wasn't always easy, especially when quite a lot of our clients were very fussy and they weren't always very patient, which means that people who had just arrived in a new situation were often quickly criticized by our clients because they hadn't got up to speed quickly enough, which was a challenge as well. And we did try to make use of technological solutions, even way back. more than 10 years ago, actually. But a part of the problem, if you've tried to use technology in teacher training, is, especially 10 years ago, it didn't always work very well. It's got much better recently. But also, and again, you probably know this, not all clients have always been very open-minded about the use of digital online teacher training, for example. And very often, a lot of people just rejected the idea that we could use technology to manage the training. They liked to do things face-to-face. And to be honest, a lot of the time, they wanted it to be people like me who did the training. So that was kind of the problem. So what was my idea? Well, probably a fairly obvious idea to most of you. I think it seemed pretty obvious to me at the time. We needed to recruit local trainers. That was my background as a DOS, as a teacher trainer. It always makes sense to me. You need to make use of the local talent. But the idea would be that we would make sure that all of the new trainers would have the same internationally recognized teacher training qualifications that all of the foreign people did. So there was no difference between us. We would try to make sure that they got the right kind of experience, but also that we would promote and encourage our customers to realize that their local knowledge and experience was going to be very, very valuable and part of our team. Again, seems pretty straightforward to me, but this was a fairly long project. This wasn't just something that happened in a short time. This was going to take 5 years or at least to be able to introduce. And it was in very much a strategic role that wasn't a new one for me. I'd been a manager before, I'd been a director of studies before, but the idea of being involved in a long-term strategic plan was maybe my first step into maybe more of what we would call leadership in some respects. So, as I said, we had 5 years. Our plan was that we were going to introduce half of our training team as local people. So we were looking for 4 of them. The way that we were going to do that is because at the time we didn't have any teacher qualifications in the country, like, well, CELTA or Delta, and Delta was going to be necessary for them. We had to offer all of those things ourselves. So the first step was to join international organizations and to be approved for international teacher qualifications that we hadn't done before, and then make sure we had a steady stream of people going through them and trying to make sure that we were choosing some of them that would come into our team. Okay, so even, I don't know, maybe that seems to you like a very, very ambitious thing to do, or maybe it seems like an obvious and straightforward thing to do. Whatever you think, it didn't work the way that I thought it was going to. In fact, it turned out to be quite a failure that I'm still trying to understand now. So kind of what happened? What went wrong? Well, there's lots of different reasons, and maybe you can think of some reasons that I can't think of, but these are my ideas. I think one of the most important aspects was, as I said, it was quite a big organization, and maybe a lot of the people didn't really understand what they were agreeing to doing. They didn't buy into some of the ideas. Of course, they said they would, and they signed agreements and things like that that said that they would, but maybe they didn't feel it. And I'm sure maybe some of you have had this experience in the past where, of course, everybody agrees that something seems to be the right thing to do in principle. But actually, when you get down to the practicalities of it, there are all kinds of reasons why it doesn't happen. Maybe because other priorities become more important, or maybe as you understand more about it, you decide that you don't like it. And some people just actually sabotage things. Another aspect of something like this is setting up new teacher training centers is expensive. There's a big investment, especially in paying the people to be able to do these things. And quite quickly, it seemed that the resources were not available to be able to do the things when we needed them. So we always spent a lot of time waiting for the resources to be able to do whatever we needed to do, whether that was technology, whether that was resources in terms of buildings and furniture. Sometimes it was people, sometimes it was just the amount of money that we needed to run new courses. Those of you who come from a management background, you're probably already familiar with things like pest analysis. So the idea that there were background political, economic, social, and technological tensions. It seemed to us that the idea of bringing local people into our team was going to be a popular idea, both with the customers and with the government. But strangely, it wasn't. It didn't work. A lot of people in lots of positions of authority and responsibility didn't seem to want this to happen for reasons. And I think at least partly, that's partly because the organization didn't communicate effectively with those people to tell them what we were doing. But that might seem as if I'm putting all of the blame on the kind of the organization as it was in that local country. I don't think it was just that. I think there are other elements as well. I think if you work for some of the international teacher qualifications organizations, although they are often or generally are very good at their job, they're not always very good at communicating. And sometimes they can be rather opaque in their systems, which means that if you're not already familiar with how these courses work, it can be quite difficult to find out how to do it. I know I've been involved in a lot of them now. Also, I think from the training team that already existed, there was a potential problem of what we sometimes would call over-professionalism, high expectations right from the beginning, maybe not being more sensitive to allowing things to happen more gradually, giving people more time to do things, and often being rather strict about what we expected about things. We also had an issue where we had one particular boss, leader of the company, who was extremely prone to rapid changes in strategic direction of the company. And it was very, very difficult to manage up in sense of trying to make sure that we kept him focused on something. And maybe just the pace of change was too rapid. I thought 5 years was enough, but maybe it should always have been longer than that. I don't know. So these are all reasons why at the end of the 5-year plan, we were nowhere near ready to have half of our training team delivering half of our training from local people. It just wasn't ready. It didn't happen. So it's time to think about the failure. If you've ever had a failure in something like a business environment, you know it can be quite painful. I remember talking to a psychologist friend of mine about it, and she said she described it as a kind of grief when something goes wrong at work. That doesn't seem important in the grand scheme of things against other issues that go on. But if you spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, and you commit a lot of yourself to a project and the project fails, it does leave you feeling very sad, very lacking in confidence and worried about kind of what you're going to do next. So this is one of the reasons why I started thinking about this idea of failure. And one of the really interesting places I started was with Amy Edmondson. So this is an article. This is from the Harvard Business Review. Great thing about the Harvard Business Review is they're not too technical. They're more like a magazine article. Anybody can read them. They're a good starting point, which is why I've used quite a few of them today. They're also free, actually. So anyway, Amy Edmondson talks about the idea that we know that we can learn from failures. We know that we should learn from failures, okay? But we're not very good at it. We're not very good at it on a personal level, and we're not very good at it on an organizational level. And why is that? Well, she says it's because we think about it in the wrong way. She points out that we just intrinsically believe that failure is bad and should be avoided. And it's natural. We want to avoid it. And if it happens, it also seems pretty natural to most people to try and hide it. And that's one of the reasons why it can be really difficult to learn from something if some people are trying to hide it. Also, there's a tendency that we think that learning from mistakes, from failures, is easy. But as most of us are trainers or managers who work with mistakes all of the time, we all talk about reflection, we all talk about feedback and all of those kind of things. But actually, we're also aware that quite a lot of the time, it doesn't work. People don't learn from failure. Some do, but quite a lot don't seem to learn. So it seems to be the case that people are just often thinking about failure in the wrong way. And one of the ways that Amy Edmondson talks about failure is she wants to get to the heart of what is blameworthy and also what is praiseworthy. And I think this is where an interesting one. So I hope this next slide is going to be clear. Let's see. I'm just going to bring it up. Sorry about that. It's just for a moment. Let me try again. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Right. Anyway, okay, now we can see the slide. So we can see here, you should be able to see on the screen now a kind of a pink to blue kind of slide. At the top, it's blameworthy, and at the bottom, it's praiseworthy. Now, having told you my story of what I think of as my failure, if you look at this slide now, normally I'd ask you to go into breakout rooms at this point, but I'm not. Just have a think about it and think, what I've told you, do you blame me for what happened? Or is there in any way that you would praise me for what happened? Well, I'm not going to ask anybody, but just to say that the problem when I look at this, and I do like it, is I seem to be able to find blame and praise for myself at just about every step. I think I am equally blameworthy and praiseworthy, and I look and I see elements of what went wrong in all of these things. Even in the one that says deviance, it might seem strange to, I mean, like I didn't deliberately sabotage the thing that I was doing, but I understand now that from a certain point of view, I may have been violating the practice, the common practice of some people within the organization that I worked for. I didn't think about it that way at the time, but maybe they did, and I didn't know about it. Going down the list, if I look at it at the other end, if I want to make myself feel better, I could say, no, actually what I was doing was, it was an exploration. I was trying something exciting and new, and even though it didn't quite come off, I tried and it was worth trying it. So I think I can see that I have something between all of them. But the thing that really stands out for me is something in the middle, which is this idea of process complexity and uncertainty to a certain level as well. So complexity is a really important issue for this talk today. And we all know this word, I think, complex, but we tend to use it in a specific way in everyday language. So I might say to somebody, I don't know, oh, how's your relationship with your girlfriend or your boyfriend? And they might say, well, you know, it's complex. What does it mean when somebody says something like that? Well, it's complex, you know, and they might have said complicated as well, by the way. But if they say complex, they're probably saying there's a lot of different things going on. I'm not completely sure I want to talk about all of those different things. So it's better to just shut up and leave it alone. That's kind of what we're doing there, isn't it? But in the talk today, I don't want to see complexity in that way. I want to see it in a quite specific, maybe even technical way, because if we have a better understanding of what complexity is, I think we might be able to avoid making some of the mistakes that we make in leadership and management in particular. So, oh yeah, before I go on to talk about complexity in more detail, there is a coda here. The coda is COVID-19 and the unintended consequences. So, as I said, my plan didn't really work. After 5 years, well, actually after 7 years, we still only had 2 local teacher trainers rather than the 4 that we were hoping for. And the 2 of them were only really half trained. And also they didn't have the experience that they should have had because a lot of the clients wouldn't accept them. But because of COVID-19, quite quickly, like probably most of you, we rushed online and we did all of the things that we needed to do to keep our company, our business going. But then after a few months, in most places, lockdowns finished and a lot of people went back to the classroom and those kind of things. But for me, I couldn't, and my colleagues, we couldn't go back to the country that we had been working in. And so it turned out that the only people who were available were the 2 local trainers. And suddenly our clients were willing to let them have a go. Suddenly they became acceptable, which means that now for the last nearly 2 years, those 2 trainers have actually been getting the experience and the training and you know, the whole thing that they always should have had. So it's not, I could say, we could say that the cloud has a slightly silver lining there in terms of their professional development at least. So, but it's not finished yet. So that's the coda. So maybe the failure wasn't total. So what could I have done differently? Well, as I've already said, really, I think probably I could have done everything differently. And if I went back and I had my time again, I definitely would. But if I'm trying to be specific, well, fortunately, I think all of the other talks that we're going to have today probably would have been really useful for me before I started on my strategic planning. So I think, I'm certain, in fact, that better communications inside the organization and outside it as well would have been better. And that's what Sandy's talking about today. Claire's going to be talking about professional development. And I think, I'm not sure yet, but I think at least part of that will be about communities of practice, about sharing professional experience between groups of people. And I think very strongly that that's something that we miss in leadership and management in ELT. I just don't think we spend enough time talking about what we're doing together. And I hope we have more opportunities to develop communities of practice. Usually IATEFL is a good place for that, so let's hope it happens. Also, as you could see, I was dealing with talent. A lot of this was about human resource issues. It was about people. It was about the talented people that we needed to do a difficult job. I'm sure we could have managed that process better, and that's what Lucie's going to be talking about today. And also, kind of connected in some ways, the idea of the trainers themselves, the practitioners. Maybe far too much of this stuff happened top down. Maybe a more level practitioner-led management system. Maybe we could have changed things quickly and better or more effectively. I don't know. But if I'd listened to Christina's talk, maybe that would have helped. So they're all coming very soon. But before they do, it's still worth sharing some ideas of my own, I hope. So one of the things that maybe we could be better is just training and development. I mean, I did have this for myself, but I think it's an important one. And when you need training and development, what do you do? Well, the first thing you always need to do is get a book. I think that's really important. And if it comes to books on ELT management, well, there's no better book than From Teacher to Manager. That's a good place to start. However, if you remember back to when we were all teachers, you probably all left whatever initial training course you had with probably a copy of Jim Scrivener or Jeremy Harmer's book. Great books, still great books, but quite quickly into your career, you begin to find that they don't actually answer enough of your questions, right? Teacher to Manager begins to do that after a while as well. There's a lot of good stuff here that gives you a start, but it doesn't sustain you for very long. And so maybe a course might be a good idea. Well, way back years ago, I did the IH Director of Studies course, and I thought that was really useful for a new manager just starting out on their career. The good news now is the same course has been extended. It's a great course, and you can do it 100% online. It's also quite cheap, and it's a really good start if you're starting out in educational management, like a DOS, for example. There are other options as well, though. So, for example, we've got the Diploma in English Language Teaching Management from English UK, that other similar courses are available, where a diploma level course in English Language Teaching Management, a much more detailed approach. And what's great about this one, I think, is not only do you get a good qualification at the end of it, but also the course is managed by really knowledgeable, really experienced people. So you get a lot of good support and feedback from them. But finally, something that personally I'm involved in quite a lot nowadays is Delta. So the Cambridge Delta Module 3. If you've already done something like this, and a lot of the trainers probably have, you probably did your Module 3 assignments on something like, I don't know, teaching the special needs of teaching young learners, or how to prepare people for IELTS or CAE or something like that. But in recent times, and something that still hasn't been used enough yet, there is an English language teaching management assignment. And I think this is a wonderful idea. So the idea is that you can do an action research project in organizational change. For example, working as an assistant director of studies, looking at maybe changing the schedule, or maybe changing, I don't know, the way that something is managed within the organization, maybe the observation schedule, for example, who knows? And you can do this as a little piece of action research, and you can use the research for your employer, and you also get your diploma at the end of it. So that was my little promotion of a few different things that I think would be useful for especially new managers. But saying that, this appeared in ELT Journal a couple of years ago. I thought it was a very useful, interesting article about the idea of that actually a lot of initial teacher training management training is necessary, is really useful, but it's not enough. It's not enough in all kinds of ways. And the ways that Wayne Rimmer talks about it, the limitations are, it can reduce anxiety, because a lot of new managers have that imposter syndrome feeling. But an imposter syndrome, or just the stress of management, is something that we do need to think about, because until quite recently, we haven't dealt with this very well at all. In fact, most of the time within management, a lot of it, we've just assumed that managers need to deal with the stress. In fact, in some ways, it's almost like the more stress you have, the better manager you are. But as we've seen over the last couple of years, good talk by George Pickering about self-management last year, about managing your own stress. And also somebody like Rachel Roberts, who you can follow on LinkedIn. They're very good about talking about how and why we shouldn't just accept that stress is a normal part of ELT management. But Wayne Rimmer does point out that one of the things that really, really bothers new academic managers is lack of clarity in their positions. The idea of the floating manager who does more than their job description tells them that they should do. We've all done that probably. And one of the reasons behind this is because of the complexity of academic management. So once again, I'm going to shift back to this idea. We need to think about the complexity of what we are doing. Now, I've already talked about this before, and if you'd like to know more about it, I wrote an article that's in Modern English Teacher. It's also it's on my YouTube video page, and the original article is in Harvard Business Review as well. But this is really about, in complex situations, how do we make sense of the situation before we start making decisions? This particular approach that I'm talking about is called Kinevin, made by a guy called David Snowden. It's been around for a while now. It's been around for more than 10 years. And a simple layout looks something like this. I say simple, but it's not simple. There's an awful lot of information on this page, and you probably won't be able to take it all in right now. But a really simple, or the clearest, easiest introduction I can make is to notice that we've got two words here: complex and complicated. And in this particular way of seeing things, they're not the same. They don't overlap. They don't have that common meaning. Complicated probably is a good way to describe what you very often will be doing as a trainer, which is that you are an expert in a particular field. You have a body of knowledge, you know what you are doing, and you can apply that knowledge to a situation. For example, if you're planning a new course, probably you use your knowledge, your skills, your expertise to create the course. So this becomes the domain of good practice. And notice it's good practice, not best practice, because when it comes down to doing something like planning a course, for example, I'm pretty sure that one of my colleagues who's just as experienced as me could plan a different but equally good course. So they would both be good and they're both valid. They're both examples of a complicated domain, the expertise. But complexity is different. Complexity is talking about situations where, for whatever reason, we don't know a lot of stuff. This is where change happens very, very quickly. It's emergent, as you can see here. If we take, for example, way back in January 2020, if we think about what we began, oh, maybe slightly later for some of you, March or February or March 2020, what we had to do is we had to make changes quickly. And probably you had to try to adjust techniques and methodologies, find new platforms, new software, new techniques for using it, new ways of arranging people. Probably the plans that you made in February 2020 were completely out of date by May 2020. By this point, you'd seen that there were some things that worked and you kept those and you encouraged more of that. And there were some things that didn't work and you'd rejected those. You saw emergent practice. It's not always just as simple as that. And you can see there's a lot more here than I've just said. But this is at least an introduction to why we need to see complex domains, complex situations as different from complicated ones. Because if we mix them up, we're not managing situations in the way that we could. And that kind of is an important point with this Cynefin idea. Because Cynefin's about the idea that very often with management, we tend to start with something like a method, or we might start with the technique or something like that. Or even more common in management, we might start with the description of the person, of the manager themselves. You often hear this, right? Where you say, oh, I'm this kind of manager, or this kind of manager would be useful in this particular situation. Cynefin doesn't do that. It says you start with the situation and then you become a different manager to suit the situation. I think that's one of the things that appeals to me the most. So that's one thing that I think. But another one is this idea of, well, let's say one of the problems with Cynefin is that it doesn't seem to have an ethical dimension. And as you probably can see from my presentation, where we're dealing with local trainers, a lot of this probably has some kind of native speakerism kind of issues. So there is an ethical dimension which maybe gets overlooked. Now, talking to some of my colleagues in other SIGs, say for example the Global Issues Special Interest Group, they come about this issue of things like diversity and inclusion and equity, often through the lens of something called critical pedagogy. Critical here meaning being critical of something, find criticism in a way. Whereas often when I look in ELT management and I find the word critical, it just means important. It's something that we don't necessarily have in ELT management. And when I talk to the guys from Global Issues, very often they don't see us managers as part of the solution at all. They see us as part of the problem, if anything at all. But an interesting thing is there is already a field of management called critical management studies. It's just one that we don't particularly see very often in academic management, which is a reflexive approach. It's again about the idea that we reflect, but we're also constantly looking to change in an ethical way. And we can do this by looking through different lenses. So to go back to an example that I've already talked about before, the idea of functional stupidity. So again, this is already on my YouTube video page. You can see more about details if you want to. But this is to say that stupidity in an organization isn't that you don't know stuff. Stupidity can be the idea that you're not using all of your abilities or knowledge or skills. You make assumptions, but you don't reflect on why you're doing it. You don't think about the consequences of your actions beyond a very limited space. Why do we not do that sometimes? It's because maybe people like bosses or the organizational structure or even the culture of an organization don't want us to be as smart as we can be. Because if we're as smart as we can be, very often it creates difficulties for the organization. It makes the organization disordered because everybody's having good ideas and it's quite difficult to keep on track. Sometimes we need some functional stupidity. I just need to just be quiet and not ask too many questions and we'll get more done. Now, so this comes from the field of critical management studies and is a very interesting way to look at something like my particular problem, because my organization was stupid in all kinds of ways. And although I don't have time to go into all of the details right now, I can reflect on it and can make some changes. So, time for me to wrap up. So a couple of things, these are my personal reflections. So you might disagree with me on these things, but I think they might be useful if you're interested. So I'm not saying that traditional training or traditional management techniques are not useful. They are. But you do need to remember that the traditions of management sometimes can be limited and limiting, especially in emergent situations. And so we need to keep looking for new ideas all the time. As I mentioned with Cynefin, don't start with, I'm this kind of trainer, or this is the method, or whatever. Kind of start by trying to make sense of a situation, because when you do that, you'll always start in the middle. You're not looking for the origin. You're not looking for the end. You're beginning in the middle, and you're trying to make sense around that way. And that way, it allows you much better to deal with the way that things change. Also, where do you, as a person, stand in this situation? In complexity theory, one of the great things about complexity is it allows us to move ourselves to one side. We are never the center. So decentering ourselves is also something that's important in critical management studies. Maybe in some cases, I just need to remove myself from the situation completely. Also, as a manager, how much control do we actually have? The interesting thing is that it seems that we both have more control and less control than we understand, all at the same time. It's kind of another stupidity issue in a way. Also, there's a tendency for managers to just look immediately for the answer. But the chances are that that is not going to provide you with a very good solution. Because basically what happens is the answer is just going to lead to more questions. So I always try to think of it in a way of, I'm just looking for more and more questions all the time. And that's what we get in the last one. A lot of management theory, a lot of management structures, they tend to make us think in an either or kind of way. And those decisions are only going to lead to kind of limited understanding of complex situations. If you want to understand complex situations, you need to find ways to ask questions that allow you to see both this and that, and then keep looking for more and more and more ands. So I failed, but I'm hoping that I'm learning something from my failure. And the next time I get to do this, I'll do a better job. And I hope, to a certain extent, maybe you learned something from my failure too. So I'm really looking forward to the rest of the talks now. And I know that I'm pushing the time, so it's time for me to hand over. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for being here. Let's say a 5-minute break. Just people want to go to the loo quickly, or they want to grab some more tea, that they can do that. And then we'll move on to the next speaker, and I think Claire will be introducing them. So let's have a quick, maybe it's 56 right now, so let's see if we can start back on the hour. And Simon, again, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was great. I hope I didn't go over time. I'm just trying to keep track of it.
That was great. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks. See you later. I'll be back a little bit later on.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Christina, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay,
perfect,
good.
perfect.
I wasn't sure if.
Yeah, hi, Claire.
So hello and hi, Claire. I will introduce you in a moment. Shall I put the slide up, Christina?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah. If you have them, if not, I could help you with.
You can start. So
that's fine.
Thank you. Yeah, because I can't share my. So pop it back to Claire. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah,
that's brilliant.
Lovely.
So Claire will start, as Gerhard said, hopefully in a few minutes on the hour.
So Claire, you are in New Zealand, aren't you? Or is it Australia?
Australia.
It's Australia. Yeah. It's quite late, isn't it?
Coming up to 11 p.m.
Oh.
But it must be quite early for some other people looking at the range of countries.
Yeah, definitely.
I think so.
South America, for example. I wonder what time it is there.
Yeah, it must be, I don't know, 8 in the morning for some people, maybe a bit earlier. I'm here in the UK, I'm in Scotland, and it's just about to be midday. So yeah, it's going to be early for some of our participants today.
Okay, somebody's just written in the chat box, it's 9 in the morning.
In Brazil, okay. Okay.
So thank you for joining us. I know it's quite, difficult to wake up this early on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, I'm just going to give about 10 more seconds and then I'll get started. Okay. Okay. I think we'll make a start. So thank you very much, Simon, the last presenter. And now we have Clare McGrath speaking for us. Claire is talking about setting up and fostering an online professional development group, which I think will prove incredibly interesting for us. At the moment, Claire is a freelance ELT and non-ELT professional development consultant and teacher trainer. currently in the wonderful city of Sydney. Her talk this morning will tell us a bit more about online platforms and social media with an overview of options of you starting perhaps your own group for professional development and how you can make it work for your own purposes. So welcome, Claire, and thank you very much. Please take it away when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As you can see, this is about online PD groups, using a couple of examples, including some failures of ones that might be in-house or regional. So just looking at the practicalities of that. I have been an English language teacher, trainer, manager. I must say I had much more fun as a trainer than as a manager. And certainly PD is one of those things that makes your heart sing, I think. It seems, you know, over time, the real stimulus you can see with the people that you're interacting with in the staff room, around the building, what you have in-house, great opportunities there, and of course, external ones. Online possibilities, in-house, regional, international. It's not necessarily that online is so new. In fact, you can see in these photos from Facebook back in 2013, I was in New York, and I deliberately went to this place because it was called the Salon de Ning. I don't know if any of you used or still use Ning as a platform, but that was what we were using in the early 2000s for PD and connections between teachers in-house. But the thing is, these days, what is different, I think, is where people are. So the teaching context, I've just put into the chat box there some possibilities to think about if you want to write something about where your teaching context is. So for example, for me now, I do mainly work with professional development with non-ELT, so lecturers in higher education, but also still teachers in ELT. The majority of it is online. The teachers themselves, though, at the moment, most of our teachers are working online. Next week, we're hoping to be able to get back on campus and go hybrid. So they'll have students who are remotely attending as well as students in the room. At the moment, therefore, most of them are in the same building, on the same campus, but in some situations that I've worked with, the teachers are not even in the same physical spaces. Sometimes these days, you know, when people are teaching, they may not have the same time available to attend PD. So if people are working in the morning, the afternoon, or the evening on shifts, for example, maybe even working in different time zones, sometimes I think what we're dealing with is needing to be aware of the problems that people have if they don't have the same opportunities they did for these kinds of things that we are used to, being in the same physical space and at the same time. What we've found with the PD that I'm doing in-house online, these days with people teaching online and or hybrid, they're not necessarily in the same physical space all the time. So the need for community building first through these kinds of things in Zoom, having a drop-in where people come in and have a chat, some social events for staff online, various kinds, you know, whatever might appeal to people, you know, trivia, quizzes, karaoke. There's been some interesting connections made between musicians amongst the teachers. Yes, the staff meeting, but starting with more informal chat at the beginning so that some of these people they haven't even met the person who's employing them, not in the real world. They've only ever had interactions with them online. And then opportunities where teachers are sharing some ideas, that helps to break down some of the walls between them, focusing on ideas, questions, problems, maybe then presentations by someone in management or in training, but also from teachers things that have been suggested or selected, or you've identified somebody has a particular interest. They might volunteer. That's great when they do, isn't it? When teachers are, you know, ready to share and drive the PD with you. Or even just, you know, being able to say to somebody, hey, you know, what you're doing, what you're talking about is really interesting. Other people need to hear this. And then, of course, there are some more formal opportunities. But that's what we've found with this scenario that I'm working in, where the teachers are not all on campus at the same time. So some of them are only there 1 day a week. Some of them are 5 days a week. Sometimes they're teaching a 1 hour class or a 4 hour class. And then various others. They don't have the same opportunity to gather in the staff room or to be together even at lunchtime, because of the way things have changed with COVID, working online. The common lunch hour has completely disappeared. That's when we used to do a lot of PD with the lure of some you know, lunch provided to get everyone to be a bit more enthusiastic about coming along in their lunch hour. The in-house more formal PD that we do, or that the teachers also do for each other, we do use Zoom. There's lots of opportunities there. I'm sure you would understand, you know, the possibilities for just changing the settings compared to what you might be using, say, with students if you're doing online classes in Zoom, so that the teachers, you know, presenters and audience are able to interact in various ways and share other things that we've been using. Padlet, like, you know, the online notice board where people can post and add comments and links and various other things. Sites like Miro, which have post-it notes online that you can manipulate, write, move around, change. That's quite useful, say, when people are brainstorming or planning something. Mentimeter, great for collecting questions and ideas, as well as for getting feedback. But one of the things we found really useful for the PD opportunities, of course, the breakout rooms. So different scenarios, you can see there are two. One where there's a presentation or a series of presentations, and then people can go into the breakout room so that they can bounce some ideas around. Or reversing that, they start in the breakout rooms, and that's where they might, for example, do a swap shop, and then they come back into the main room afterwards to talk about what they've picked up from this, what their action plan is. We do also record the PD where I am, because people can't always make it at that time. And so they have the opportunity to listen to the recording, look through the slides at a later date. We will talk about that a bit more, how they do that, but just finishing off talking about Zoom and the breakout rooms. I really like playing around with some of those options there. For example, with that possibility of allocating people manually, you can just get them to rename themselves in Zoom with a number or a letter at the beginning of their name. So then when I'm allocating them to breakout rooms, or when the other presenters are allocating them, it's very easy to go down the participants list and just pick off all the ones and allocate them to room 1, and then the 2s. It's actually quite quick. But when I was planning this, I was thinking about some of the lovely opportunities we've had for face-to-face events, and it's very difficult to replicate that buzz that you get when there's a group of people in the room who are all having great discussions and getting great ideas. But trying to piggyback that in a way, for example, with breakout rooms, in the same way that presenters do a tour of the room, presenting at a table, moving on to another, rotating through the room. If you make the presenters co-hosts, then they are able to move between breakout rooms. So they might present a short piece to a breakout room and then move on to another one. Similarly, people like the audience being able to move around from one presenter to the next, being able to join a breakout room and then join another one, that's a great opportunity. Not quite the same as face-to-face, but close. I should say that in that context there, for those people who can't always attend the live PD, there is a teacher's lounge within the LMS. We have a Moodle. So you can see in the teacher's lounge here, within that, it's actually quite a great space because you can have the things that teachers need to find all the time. For example, information about working wherever you are, you know, different things they need to know, what's appropriate, what's expected, how the PD sessions work. We do give points for the PD, so people are expected to achieve a certain number of points over the year through in-house and external PD opportunities, presentations that they do at conferences, articles that they write as well. But I mentioned the Teachers Lounge here because there's also the discussion forum within that related to the various topics of professional development. And also just mentioning at the moment, it's being renovated because you know what it's like sometimes when you have something that grows in an LMS like Moodle or Blackboard, etc. It could, or even in Microsoft Teams, it can grow over time and become a little bit disorganized, a little bit sloppy. Some of the things don't quite make sense anymore, or they're in the wrong place, or they're presented poorly. We found that the tile format works really well. So it's, as I said, being renovated, but if you can imagine these things here, after the announcements and calendar at the top, these other things are in these different tiles. It's very easy for them to find what they need quite quickly. And then within those, they would have, for example, different PD topics and discussion forums related to them. There is another option, and this was one that I tried. This is my failure, so I'm going to be very pleased to hear about this. What I might do is I'll put that link in later. You can see it was from a face-to-face Meet ELT Sydney event, and it just really captures the dynamics, the atmosphere of a face-to-face meeting. I'll put that into the chat for you to have a look at later. What I was hoping for was that fabulous energy and buzz and enthusiasm to be happening here in this Google Classroom. But what I got was instead, you can see here, I was posting these things here and very, very few comments. In fact, here, you know, there was just one. Some of the reasons for this, I think primarily it was the purpose. We were trying to provide a place for people to access things that they couldn't from the Teachers Lounge, because to access that Teachers Lounge, you needed an email address from that particular organisation. And the PD that I do involves a couple of other related universities and colleges. They couldn't access that Teachers Lounge. So the purpose here was really very static. It was just like a library. So not surprising that nothing else happened there. There weren't any particular guidelines for the teachers about what to expect or what to do there. And I do think this is another thing to think about. They have emails, they have the Teachers Lounge, they have the Zoom webinars, and they have face-to-face PD, and they have Microsoft Teams. This was just too much. It was one more thing they didn't need to look at. Bearing in mind also that these people are not necessarily working only for these institutions. Some of them work at 2 or more other institutions as well to get a full-time load. I think some of the names here are a bit confusing. I didn't choose these, but I always had to think very hard about where I was going to be posting something, because to me, some of those labels there were pretty similar. So in the end, wrong choice of platform, the whole look, the whole feel of it didn't work. We had a few issues as well with what we were storing there. Just too much, quickly started to run out of space. But yeah, it needs to be thought about how you set it up and where. So these are some other options. I'm just curious what sites you're using. If you want to write in chat about the kinds of sites that you're using. Are you using Google Classroom? Are you using Teams? Are you using, okay, I can see Moodle, Teams, lots of Teams. And as you write, you might see people saying some things like this. So what you choose, I think, is going to depend on your purpose, but do really consider what the teachers are already using, what they're familiar with. For example, using some of the forums like Microsoft Teams, they're already using those with their students. It's easier for them then to use it for PD. And giving them a choice about what they use, plus other issues that you might have to contend with, what's going to be appropriate. Okay, so I can see other ones, Classroom, mostly Zoom, Blackboard, for the benefit of those people who won't be able to see the chat. So I'd like to give you one example here where it's a private Facebook group. It's called AusELT. I think I'll know the answer to this question. If there is anyone from AusELT, you could just write Y in the chat box, but as it's coming up for, I don't know, what is it, 11:17, I better finish fairly soon. You may not get too many yeses, 11:17 p.m. But it's a regional group. And so the point about this is you can see who is here. They're from a range of different places. And immediately you might be wondering what these terms are. These are very common terms used in Australia and New Zealand. It was important to have a place where we were talking about the same kind of context, the same kind of student needs, the same kind of providers and conditions, etc. It works very much as you expect a Facebook group does, but it does have an article discussion group chosen by polls from the English Australia Journal, that's the peak professional body, and questions over the week. So that's one other option you might want to have a look at. There's some thoughts here, I'll be finishing fairly soon, just to think about how you kick this off, what you decide, how formal and informal it's going to be, how it's going to be organised, what you'd like to be included or not. But think about how you're going to seed the ground, who are the people who are going to get it moving, if it's in-house or if it's regional. Remember, the evidence of what people are doing can be a little bit disappointing. You might see, say, one person has posted, 9 people commenting, the other 90 are just lurking in the background, but I guarantee that they're actually reading and thinking, checking posts and going away talking about it. What you'll see later in the slides for the end, so I can wrap it up on time, there's a little bit of background about how that group works as a private Facebook group that's across several institutions, how we administer it. And I've included at the end some links if you do want to read a little bit more about that in-house regional group, AusELT, and also Meet ELT, the one I mentioned. So I hope that we'll have a chance to talk at some stage about what your strategies are for PD. I think it's one of the most energising and exciting things. In English language teaching, teachers are much more responsive and cooperative with PD opportunities. I hope you find that true. But thank you very much for that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Claire. Another really interesting presentation with lots of thoughts and ideas for us to think about and process. And yeah, we've got some time at the end, everybody, for discussions and questions and things. So please feel free to put anything in the chat box as well. Christina and I are monitoring the chat box as well. So thank you once again to Claire. We now have our next speaker, Lucie Cotterill. Just going to, hopefully she's here and okay, and I can see her logged in.
Yes, here I am.
Because we haven't spoken on chat or anything quite yet. But our next speaker is Lucie Cotterill, and her presentation topic is Time for Talent. It's on the screen there. Time for Talent, Effective Talent Management in the 2020s. So Lucie, welcome today. Lucie is a teacher, academic manager and trainer based in the south of Italy, working at IH as a director of innovation. And her talk today with us is going to focus on the increasing importance of developing a strategy and a framework for managing talent within a language teaching organization. Lucie, are you able to share your screen? Have we made you co-host?
Yes, I think so.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I can see you in the thing, in the list of participants. No, just checking that the tech is working okay.
It's always good to check.
I know. So yeah, I can see your slides there, Lucie. Thank you. So when you're ready, please take it away.
Okay, great. So, hello everybody, first of all. So I just wanted to start by telling you why I decided to focus on this topic. And it kind of comes from a wider reflection and reading about how the workplace is in general is changing as a reaction to how society is changing. And one person who wrote a lot about modern society is this man. And if anybody knows his name, do write it in the chat box. Now, this was a Polish philosopher and sociologist. His name is Zygmunt Bauman, and he wrote a lot about liquid modernity, which is the era that he said that we entered in the 2000s. And it's an era where society and individuals within it are kind of caught up in this constant flow of mobility and speed, with frequent continuous change and adaptation to those changes as well. It's a society where we have to behave almost like a liquid. So we're changing our shape as needed. Now, we've heard a lot about the need to be an agile organization in order to succeed nowadays, but I do like the liquid metaphor because I think it very clearly shows us how we need to change to fit the needs of our customers, so both external, so students or parents, as well as internal employees. And how employees, especially since the pandemic, might want more fluid career paths. Now, this fluidity, of course, affects the structure of the organizations, which are also shape-shifting as a result of the rising gig economy. And according to, I think it was a survey by Da Vinci Payments, the gig economy has grown 33% during the pandemic. Now, it's not really something that's new to us in ELT, because a large part of our workforce may always have been temporary or freelance. So the good thing is that we're well prepared for this change. But our organizational model still might need a rethink, given that our potential and existing employees may be wanting more flexibility, not just in terms of the day-to-day working hours or location, but also in terms of career path. So, for example, we might have more boomerang employees, staff who work with us for a while, then leave, then come back, maybe in a different role. So our organizational structure may need, like a liquid, to change its shape from the more traditional hierarchical structure, with a focus where the focus is on clearly defined roles, to a more project-based one or a matrix structure. Now, with a need to focus on skills, talent management cultures are becoming more prevalent. So launching a talent management program can also be a way to reassure your staff that your organization feels confident about the future, because many staff at the moment are feeling uncertain and they're lacking the job security that they may once have had pre-pandemic. Now, this is from the book Talent Management in Education by Davis and Davis, and it shows some of the features of a talent management culture compared to a more traditional development culture. But new structures and cultures bring new challenges. And one of the ones which most greatly affects the success of our school, in my opinion, is how we manage talent. So that's what I'm going to speak about today. But first of all, let's define talent. So talent can be quite a broad term. So can you just throw some ideas in the chat? How would you define talent? What does talent mean to you? Thanks, Claire. Special ability or skill, high level of skill. Thanks, Lucia. Skills and creativity as well. Thank you. Yes, someone creative, skills and eagerness. I like that. Competence. Yeah. Great. Some really good ideas there. Ability gained by birth. Now that's interesting. The nature or nurture. Hidden ability needed to be discovered. Yeah. Aptitude or skill. Okay. Well, I'm going to give you a definition of talent from the Chartered Institute for Professional Development back in 2017. Now, there are two words in this definition that I want to draw your attention to because we'll be focusing on them later, and they are performance and potential. They're two key words in talent management, and the importance of one over the other can change depending on the form talent management takes in your organization. But what exactly is talent management? So here's another definition, this time from the Michigan State University. And I chose this one because it highlights the need to have some kind of talent management plan or strategy, which focuses not only on finding the talent, but also on developing it and keeping it within the organization. So what I'm going to share with you now is a kind of framework that you can use to create a plan for talent management in your school. Now, obviously, organizations can vary hugely. So from a school with just a couple of teachers to a national language teaching organization with several centers, or a global organization. So the framework I'm suggesting today is a very general 5-step framework. And the steps don't necessarily need to happen in the order that I'm going to go through them today. You might even find that you don't need all the steps, but hopefully it will help you to manage your talent management strategy regardless of the size of your organization. So let's start with stage 1. Now, what do you think the first step in this talent management framework might be? Can you put some guesses in the chat, please? Identifying the talent. Thank you, Lucie. That's a good place to start from, isn't it? Defining the need for talent, also a good one. Identifying personal brand. Okay, some great ideas there. Thank you. Now, actually, when I first thought about talent management, I always thought the first step was, well, what talent do we need? But actually, we need to kind of have a couple of steps before that. And this one, stage 1, is about clarity of vision, values, and brand. Who are we as an organization? Everybody, not just potential new employees, but also existing ones, need to know who you are as well as your visions, value, and organizational culture. And yes, thank you, Vicky. We do want to be attractive to the talent as well if we're recruiting. Now, I did promise you in the blurb for the talk some practical ideas. So here is the first practical idea. So it can be useful to have a meeting, and depending on the size of your organization, this could be with all employees or just a group of them. So for example, just full-time permanent staff or a representative from each department. And we get them all together and we ask them the question, who are we? What do we believe in? So maybe reviewing any kind of existing mission or vision statement so as to create more alignment and make sure that everyone is looking in the same direction. Because we can't really understand the talent we need if we're not clear about who we are. And we can't attract the right talent if we can't clearly communicate who we are. So this is an important first step. Now, on to the second step. So we come to stage 2. We know who we are. What do you think the next step is? Can you pop your ideas in the chat box, please? What's the next step after we've identified who we are? Think about who we need. Yeah, strengthen ourselves. Hello, Abia. What do we do? Making it for. Okay, great ideas there. Now, what I've got in this plan is clarifying, or in some cases defining, our school's business objectives. Once we have our objectives, so we know where we want to go, we know what we want to achieve, we can then identify the skills that are needed to be able to achieve those objectives. So we can work out also where there may be talent gaps. Now, to give you an example, an objective may be that your school wants to open a young learner department. And in order to do that, we might need teachers who have particular skills related to educating children, But we might also need to start a targeted social media campaign to recruit the students. So we need someone whose talent is in that area too. And we may need customer service staff to be able to effectively deal with this new stakeholder, the parents. So we need talents there as well. And when we're identifying our talent needs, we've got to consider not just what we need now, but also bear in mind what we might need in the future. And if you can't think of any talents that your organization might need in the future, you might have a talent gap there related to innovation. Now, during this stage, it's also, I think, worth reflecting on the discussions you're having to see if you're referring mainly to roles. So, for example, we need a young learner teacher, or to skills, the skills needed to achieve the business objectives. So, for example, we need social media skills. We need people talented in interacting with children and parents. So becoming much more focused on the skills works much better in a talent management and project-based culture. Now, it's very important that management or anybody who leads staff is involved in this stage, because if you don't have buy-in from the managers for your talent managed strategy, it's very unlikely to work. Now, let's move on to stage 3, which in some cases, this stage might be skipped. Any ideas what this stage might be? I'm going to tell you that this stage, advertising to find new talent, looking for talent. Yeah, it is recruiting. Okay. Now, you may be recruiting externally or internally, but either way, you'll be doing interviews and trying to attract the best talent. And interviews are a really important point in the talent management cycle. The type of questions you ask, they don't only affect what you discover about an applicant's talent, but also they help the applicant to see whether their talents might be useful in your organization. So when thinking about interview questions to identify and attract talent, I want to return to the 2 keywords that we saw at the beginning of the talk when we were defining talent management. And they were performance, which refers to what the candidate has done so far, doesn't necessarily indicate what they're capable of. And the other was potential, which refers to what the candidate could do in the future. Now, questions which focus on performance with the specific aim of uncovering talent are ones like these. There's some examples. And the last one is actually leading us to discover potential talents as well, skills they may have, but they haven't utilized in the workplace so far. And we often tend to focus on performance questions in interviews, but we need to make sure there's a balance of questions which evaluate performance and potential. And here are some more questions for identifying potential. Now, the 4th question is useful because it reveals talents that the applicant thinks we need in the organization that we currently have. So they may also be able to identify a talent gap and how they can fill it. And this last question shows you what other talents or what other areas they might have interest in or talents in. So the practical idea here would be to ensure that there is a focus in interviews on finding out skills which are not on the CV. So, maybe they sent a beautifully designed CV or a video, so it shows they've got design skills. And also questions that are less predictable and easy to prepare for. So on to the next stage. Now, this is stage 4 is about finding out the talents of your existing team. And I think Dominic mentioned it earlier as well. Now, a more inclusive way to manage talent is to grow it from within. Now, I don't have time today to go into detail about the different approaches to talent management, but I am going to share a link to an interesting research paper that I read, which identified 4 types of talent management which are used in organizations. Now, one of them is humanistic, which is inclusive, and it's the one that I'm thinking of at stages 4 and 5 today. There's also competitive, elitist, and entrepreneurial. And they do give examples in that paper of the 4 different types. So how do we find the talent within? Well, the most obvious way to do this is through dialogue. So talking to your staff about what they do outside of work. It's not only good for building relationships, but it can also bring some really useful information regarding their talents. And if you're open about the business objectives that you set earlier in the process, they're more likely to share the talents they have or that they want to develop, which can help you achieve the business objectives. Now, I think it's time for another practical idea. So I'm going to describe an activity you can do with the whole team or representatives from various teams. And I'd usually include a mixture of teaching and admin staff, which aims to reveal talents. Now, the activity initially appears to be a getting to know you activity, but it actually leaves you with a database of talents for each of your staff members that you probably didn't know about before. Now, what happens is you give everyone a piece of paper and you ask them to secretly write 2 or 3 talents they have that not everybody at work knows about. And it's important they don't write their name on the paper. The papers are then collected and put into a jar or hat or whatever, and you pull them out randomly and read them out, and the others have to guess who those talents belong to. You can do this on a Google form if you're online. Now, this works well as a fun team building activity, but it also makes not just you, but everyone else aware of the unique talents within the organization, which is a great way to increase learning, connections, and inclusivity within the organization. Now, the key lesson here is that it's essential to keep track of employees' talents. What might seem like a useless talent now might be really, really useful in the future. So, for example, in our school, we started teaching maths IGCSE 6 years ago. Now, 10 years ago, a knowledge of advanced level maths is a skill we would have thought completely irrelevant. But actually, it's something that we really value now. So for a large organization, keeping track of talents could mean investing in AI-assisted talent management systems. For smaller educations, it could, or smaller organizations, it could just be an Excel file with a list of the teachers and talents. And another way to identify the talent in your organization is to take an appreciative inquiry approach, which I first heard about actually at a LAMSIG event with Sarah Mercer in 2020. And Andy Hockley also gives a really good summary of it in this post if you want to know more about it. So appreciative inquiry is different to the traditional approach to innovation, change management or development, which was generally looking for problems or things to improve. And that's important in talent management, because if we focus too much on what's missing, we fail to see the talents that are actually there. Now, having identified the talents we have in our organization, it's time to think about how to develop the talents. So here we are at the final stage, developing talent. Now, I spoke about inclusive talent management in the last stage, and I think as educators, we want to believe that everyone's talents can be nurtured and beneficial to the organization. And someone will be more motivated to develop a talent if it's one they want to develop. One way to find this out is in an employee engagement questionnaire. This is an example of a question you can ask to find that out. But you might also want to know if they want to learn new talents, which could be valuable in other areas of the organization. So maybe asking questions like, if you could shadow someone else in another part of the organization for a day, who would it be? Because if we want staff to be engaged, and engagement obviously retains the staff, we have to give them the opportunity to stretch themselves in areas they want to develop in, which are aligned to the business objectives, of course. And thinking back to the organizational structure I mentioned at the beginning and the idea of fluidity, we can't assume they want to move up a hierarchy. They may want to move sideways or even downwards, maybe for a year or so, perhaps for personal circumstances. They can't handle the position they're in at the moment, so they want to change for a little bit. But the only way to find this out is through frequent dialogue. So I've gone through all the stages. Here is a little summary of them, and I will be around later as well to ask any questions, answer any questions even, or maybe ask them too. Okay, so.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lucie.
Thank you.
I love your colourful slides.
As these great slides go, I love it.
Christina?
Yeah.
Over to you.
Yes. Thank you very much. So, well, Sandy's here, I guess. Hello, Sandy.
Hello, Christina. Hello, everybody.
Hi. Yeah, okay, fantastic. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our following speaker, Sandy Millin. Sandy is a freelance ELT consultant, teacher trainer, materials writers, and a teacher. She also has 6 years of experience as a director of studies. She blogs at sandymillin.wordpress.com and she tweets us at Sandy Millin. She has self-published books focused on teacher development, such as ELT Playbook and ELT Playbook Teacher Training, and a book of ways to adapt speaking activities, which is called Richer Speaking. And today she'll be talking about clearer communication. Over to you, Sandy.
Hello, everybody. I'm just going to warn you in advance that if I'm pulling funny faces, it's because the cat is trying to come and join in with the presentation. So hopefully it will be all right. Hello, everybody. Yeah, so today I'm talking about clearer communication. All of the slides will be available on my blog. The link is at the bottom here, and it will also be on the right-hand side of every slide. So don't worry if you miss something. I'm going to go through it quite quickly because it's normally a 30-minute presentation, but please do ask questions in the chat and I'll be able to answer them afterwards as well. I picked this topic because I think if you're a manager or if you're a teacher trainer, I think being able to communicate clearly is a key thing that you can work on, and I think it makes a real difference to how you interact with your team if your communication is clear. I'm going to start off with tip number 1, which is, before you communicate, listen. So one thing you can do if you're trying to listen to somebody, but you know you have a tendency to interrupt like me, is to use your fingers to stop yourself. So Victoria here is demonstrating that, or like this. I can put my finger on my mouth, I can have a thinking pose. It's much harder to talk if you're physically stopping yourself. So that's a really good way to make yourself listen without interrupting. Make sure that you're paying full attention, that you're not doing something else at the same time. Look at the person who's speaking. Don't be looking at emails or your phone or whatever at the same time. If you need to look something up while you're talking to them, tell them that that's what you're doing. Pause, do that, and then come back to giving them your full attention. Think about what they're not saying as well as what they are saying. So look at body language, look at gestures, think about what you know about that person. Sometimes being open to what they're not saying can be useful communication for you as well. So here are some general tips for clearer communication, and then we'll move on afterwards to some things which are specific to particular avenues of communication. So my first tip is consider your medium carefully. So think about, should this be a phone call? Should it be an email? Should it be a Zoom chat? If you have the option, should it be face-to-face? If so, where should it be? Should it be in private, or can it be in a more public place? So think about how you're communicating. When you're giving people, when you're communicating with people, be clear about what information doesn't exist. So for example, when I was giving out timetables to people, I would tell them, I don't have this information yet. As an extension from that, don't hide information that people need to know. Obviously, sometimes there are confidential things, but if it's something that they need to know, don't hide it, because that will potentially cause problems down the line. Give them all of the information that you have that is relevant to what they need to know. If you make mistakes when you're communicating, be open about those mistakes and apologize when needed. Acknowledge that you made a mistake. That can build a lot more goodwill than trying to brush over the mistakes or trying to pretend that they didn't happen. And be a learning communicator. I'm going to come back to that at the end of the presentation. So these are my general tips. So thinking about the timing of your communication. So when you are communicating with people, particularly if you're sending emails or, for example, WhatsApp messages, think about what implicit messages you're sending about the working hours that you expect people to have, about your availability or the availability that you expect them to have, and about response times that you think are reasonable for them. So for example, if you say you need a response within 2 hours, that means you assume that they are looking at their email or their messages and that they will be available to send that response within that time. So be reasonable about the response times that you expect. Something that I think a lot of people don't know about is the schedule send function, which exists on a lot of email platforms. So this is from Gmail, for example. Instead of clicking send, I can click schedule send. So I might want to set up my emails at an unreasonable time on a Friday night, but they don't necessarily need to see it. It doesn't need to be sent to their inbox until 9 o'clock on Monday morning. So I can set that up. I can also set up reminders for things in the future all at the same time. So that could be a really useful tool. Thinking about meetings, when you are organizing a meeting, sorry, that was the cat. When you're organizing a meeting, ask yourself, is it actually an email that you should be sending? Is what you're organizing really worth a meeting, worth spending lots of people's time at the same time concurrently? Or should you really send an email instead? Before the meeting, make sure you know exactly what the meeting is for, what is the purpose of the meeting, and who the meeting is for. Is it just there for you to say some ideas out loud? Or is it actually a meeting where you expect interaction with the other person or the other people involved? Another thing to consider, this is, I know you can't read this, you're not supposed to be able to read it. This is an example of a weekly agenda from our teachers meeting at the school that I used to work at. And we used to have a 30-minute meeting every week that basically kept the teachers up to date with what they needed to know about what was coming up at the school. We worked with a lot of early career teachers. There was also a lot of input on, how to do particular things within the school. And so we didn't necessarily say everything. I had the agenda on display when the meeting started as people were coming in so that they could read the information at the top, and they were just reminders. I didn't need to spend time saying those things. And you can see there's also some color coding. So if I was asking them to do something, if it was the second time I was asking for something fairly urgent, it would be color coded orange. If it was the third time, it would be color coded red to give them that information about, no, really, I really need you to do this. If I had lots of information to give them, then I tried to break it up. So in the same way that you would in a lesson, I would have pauses and get them to, tell somebody else in the meeting, what do you need to remember, or what questions do you have about what's happened so far, so that they weren't just listening to me the whole time. Unfortunately, in this presentation, I don't have time to break up my information dump because it's quite short, but giving that gap for people to process the information can be really useful. If you are having a meeting, make sure that when people leave the meeting, they know that the next steps in what they need to do are clear. Who is doing what and by when? So make sure that you've got that written down somewhere and that everybody is clear about that. It can be worth sending out a summary after the meeting with that information, depending on how you use minutes within your meetings. If you're doing this kind of weekly teachers meeting, a regular meeting, include positives and thank yous as well. Don't just make it, you must do this, don't forget about this, have you done this? I think having those positives and those thank yous helps teachers to see that you are noticing good things as well. You're not just focusing on what needs to be done. So thinking about emails now, when you write an email, make sure that the subject line is very clear. You can see here that I've told them exactly what the email is about, and I've given them information about when I want them to reply by as well. That tells them in the subject line there is information here that you will need to respond to. If you use the word urgent in your subject line, be very selective about when you do it. Make sure it actually is urgent. If it's not within the next 2 or 3 hours, or maybe if you're recruiting somebody within the next 24 hours, then it probably isn't urgent. So think carefully about when you use that word. If you're sending out a lot of information to teachers or to trainees on a teacher training course, for example, think about whether it's better to send one single big email with a single subject line, like this one that I've got the subject for here, or whether it's better to send out smaller emails that each have a separate specific subject line. That can be useful if you want people to reply to different things, or you think they might need to keep some things but not other things. So think about how big your message is, whether it should be one big message or smaller ones. If you are sending out a big message, again, you're not expected to be able to read this, but this is the message that went with that subject line. You can do things like using headings. So hopefully here you can see that some of the things are in bold to help people find their way around. That included information like new teachers and returning teachers. So it gave them signposts about which bit of the email were relevant to them. You can also highlight key points. So you can see I've got bits of blue throughout that highlight to help them navigate their way around the email. But I chose to send one big email in this case with all of the documents they needed, all of the information they needed, so that I could check for myself that I'd given them all of the information, for example. When you're writing emails as well, make it as easy as possible for the people who are reading the email. Don't expect them to read between the lines. Be explicit about things like what reply you want and when you want it by. Don't expect them to understand or to know what reply you want. That way lies frustration, I think. If in a week you go, why haven't they replied to me? Look back at your original email and go, well, did I tell them I wanted a reply? And did I tell them I wanted it within the next week? If you want them to click on a link or go to a particular place, make sure you include those links in the email as well. Don't make 20 people spend a minute each going to look for a link. That would take you 1 minute for you to put in the email. That will save everybody a lot of time and strife. And I think if people can see that you're trying to make their lives easier, that is good for morale apart from anything else. Also, if you're demonstrating by example, hopefully when people send things to you, they will do the same thing in reverse as well. When you are sending out things like this, make sure that you keep track of what you're sending. So one thing you can do if you're sending out documents, different versions of documents, is to use reverse order in the name of the document heading right at the beginning. So here, for example, you can see that it sorts them all out in the folder and it makes it clear which document, which version of the document you have. If you set any deadlines, make sure you make a note of them and follow up with people, but not everybody, just those who didn't meet the deadline. It's very frustrating if you're a person who's met it and you keep getting follow-up emails. When you're giving feedback to people, use a feedback model and check with them first, can I give you some feedback? If they say no, they're probably not ready to hear it. Describe the behavior that is causing you to do this, to give them this feedback, and describe the impact of that behavior. So for example, when you don't reply to my emails, it creates extra work for me. And discuss the next steps with them. So what can you do about this? Or how can I help you to reply to my emails more efficiently? When you're giving feedback, focus on behavior and actions rather than personality. And make sure that you're holding yourself and the teachers, and that the teachers are holding themselves to realistic expectations. Boost confidence of teachers and spot their strengths as well. And aim to, sorry, the cat's coming again. Aim to be compassionate in your communication. Sorry. Make sure that you ask questions rather than assuming behavior or assuming responses from people. Make sure that you're patient and supportive when you're communicating with people. And if you have any particular bugbears within communication, provide training about it. So one of mine is people replying to everybody rather than just replying to me, or sending out a whole bunch of email addresses publicly rather than using VCC. So I teach people about this. Make sure you're on the receiving end of your own communication by copying yourself into any of these group emails so that you can see how many emails are coming out. That's how I noticed I was sending out too many emails. And record one of your meetings if you can, and sit through it from the other side. What is it like when you're not doing the speaking, when you're doing the listening? I mentioned earlier on then being a learning communicator. So reflect on your communication. What was unsuccessful, what was successful, and why, and use that to help you further improve your communication. Seek out feedback. So find out from people whether your communication is effective or not, and why. And choose an area to work on with your communication and do it. So one of my areas was on giving more balanced feedback and making sure that I was giving positive feedback to people, and not just focusing on negatives or things that needed to be done. And make sure that you're kind to yourself. If communication goes wrong, that's fine. You're learning. As long as it doesn't go wrong in the same way many, many times, then you're not. But if it goes wrong, learn from it and become a better communicator that way. That is the end of my presentation. I hope that those tips will help you, and I will have a look at the chat and answer any questions that you have.
All right. Thank you very much, Sandy. You've given us lots of tips. Thank you very much. And I think that we can actually take the questions to the discussion part. And probably everyone is a little bit, tired. So I suggest we take a 5-minute break, just a 5-minute break. Sorry, Christina. And then we'll be back. So we can just start at maybe 4:05. Is that okay? Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah, all right. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
See you all soon. All right, lovely. So let's see if Gerhard is here. Gerhard, hi, and happy birthday again.
Thank you very much.
Happy birthday. Happy 27.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Thank you. That's exactly what I want to be hearing. Before I introduce Christina, I'm going to just put a link in the chat box. If you want a certificate for today's event, there's two things. You need to fill in your name and your email address. I've just put the form in the chat box. So if you do want a certificate for today's event, please fill out that form and then you'll receive a PDF certificate for the event. So let me introduce Christina. I've known Christina for, I think it's 5 years. We met when we were both on the IATEFL committee, I think. It might have been 6 years.
Yeah, something like that. 5, 6 years. Yeah.
Christina's based in Greece. She's got a PhD in applied linguistics. She does a lot of things. If I have to tell you everything she does, that will take up 15. She also got a book coming out called Teaching Practices in Equitable Learning in Children's Language Education. If you look at the blurbs that we put out, you'll be able to contact her if you want to get in contact with her. I'm not going to say much more. Christina, thanks for being here, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to both SIGs for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be here today. And thank you everyone for joining me. And I hope that this session inspires real support towards educators, because we need a capable and strong education system now more than ever. So in this session, we will be looking at how to support teachers through challenging times from the managers and from the teacher educators perspective. More specifically, we will be looking at an overview of the teaching challenges of today, teachers' needs in challenging times, the role of management training and education initiatives, implementing teacher leadership, and some practical ideas, practical tips. So, of course, you are well aware of the challenges COVID has caused these past few years, and that the spread of the pandemic created a chaotic situation in the field of education, where school closures affected students across the globe. Specifically, as you can see in this figure here, it affected over 1.38 billion students from pre-primary to tertiary education. Second, perhaps only to public health, no other sector has been more impacted by what we've been going through with COVID these past few years. And in the midst of the pandemic, we can see that education has undergone rapid changes. We see a constantly evolving array of school models, whether in person, hybrid, or fully remote, which consequently makes the work of the teacher trainer and the school manager even more demanding and complex. So it is obvious that our teachers need support to effectively face these new challenges, deal with added stress, burnout, and the high expectations that the education system and the community at large have of them. So taking in the management perspective, if there's one thing that teachers consistently ask for, is for more time, and especially now with this whole chaotic situation that we've been going through. So the main takeaway here would be with time is to develop ways to give it unconditionally to teachers. I know this may not always be possible, but it is important to schedule or mandate anything else in its place, not to mandate schedule anything else in its place. Even in the midst of challenging times, growth is necessary to meet the needs of the teachers. Of course, there's no point in reverting back to growth and coaching and giving feedback to the teachers. Of course, there's no point in going back to our old ways of traditional observations and evaluation protocols, because they won't result in any improved outcomes in the new norm. So taking this away and replacing it with non-evaluative strategies consisting of coaching and feedback will go a long way with teachers and towards creating an empathetic environment. as emphasis on an emphasis on priority standards can significantly reduce teachers' burden while streamlining other pedagogy aspects such as assessment. So in the end, more manageable conditions are created for our teachers. And of course, we need to offer a variety of PD, not just the standard what we think is appropriate for our teachers, but it would be wise to consider asking or researching what our teachers are in need of or what they want in order to offer more PD. Communicate new norms with students and their families, especially when we're talking about young learners. Especially when we're talking about communicating with teachers directly, digitally, what kind of what the norms are there when they can communicate with teachers, what about, etc., etc. This whole situation needs some new coaching. And to encourage and celebrate our teachers, we need to give shout outs to our teachers if we're sending out newsletters, if managers send out newsletters, monthly newsletters, for example, or if students or parents compliment teachers, it's important to let them know and lift their spirits. This all has to do with supporting our staff. And when we're talking about teacher training, which also comes high in our priorities, we need to look at digital literacy, which has been buzzing, and for good reason. Teachers need to be trained and well informed about digital literacy, which is not just the use of digital tools, of course, but the whole pedagogy around it. Of course, teachers need to be aware of the tools and equipment they are using and how to use it and whether it would be effective in their context. This can be done via targeted teacher training programs. Training in the delivery of blended and online courses are vital, of course, and it's important to include training in the use of assistive learning devices and digital tools so as to prompt teachers to provide inclusive teaching, whether online or on site. So now about practicing self-care. Of course, I'm not suggesting that we include a module where we offer aromatherapy or yoga, although that would be lovely. But this is my suggestion here is making self-care present within the training program and prompt teachers to reflect and practice self-care and raise awareness really of the importance of teachers' mental and physical health. Furthermore, teacher training takes on a new twist. Not only do we need to train our teachers in things like digital literacy or how to deliver with the use of various tools and equipment, but we also need to support our teachers on how they will actually coach their students in order to use these tools for educational purposes. And finally, and this mostly applies to teachers trained to teach young learners, things are changing from the parent front as well. So it's important to maintain a balance in parental involvement with when working with young learners, especially if we're working with young learners online. So our teachers need to be able to also coach parents in the etiquette of online teaching and online learning. So this is also something that teachers need a lot of support on and training. Now, when we're talking about education initiatives, there are a number of initiatives we can work on to make the new norm work to our advantage as managers and as teacher trainers. So one could be to provide multisensory support in schools, and as part of teacher training programs, as they are key to helping students with language-based learning differences and thrive in a virtual learning environment. Of course, this is more than possible. It's important to provide assistive technologies and tools and integrate it into the language lessons and or teacher training programs offered. It's important to provide teachers and students, of course, with guidance on the pandemic and disease control, and it might be wise to work with healthcare professionals with this one. And finally, schools can create online peer-to-peer connections among colleagues, which could advance efforts to promote teachers' mental and physical well-being. And this, I think, this has started in quite a few schools in the United States, if I'm not mistaken, and I think it's working out very well. So this is, I strongly suggest something like this. Now, more than ever, building leadership within the field of language education is very important. And it is important that within our schools we have clear goals, empower teachers, show them and students continuous support, communicate our vision and how we plan to move forward and overcome barriers, and show appreciation and value towards all school staff. This will help us grow and stay united and strong during these very challenging times. And as you can see, this is we're not only talking about COVID here. So it's important to stay united and build each other up. So all these steps will lead to a more positive attitude, success, better performance, collaboration, fresh ideas, clear goals, and increased motivation, and it can actually change the narrative. So it's important to remember that the education community is developing, and our mindset as teacher educators and school managers is also growing. However, the continuation of research in order to achieve everything we've discussed today is needed, and this can be something that you take on as teacher trainers or as managers. It will give the field a voice, and it could work wonders for language education. And this is something that I strongly support as a researcher as well. I feel that in practice, things can work in practice if we actually look into them in depth and investigate situations. So if I were to suggest for you to do something like this, I would strongly suggest reflection. Reflect during training or school management. And of course, you might say, where do I start and what do I look into? Look into what challenged you or what is challenging you, and what do you need to find out more about? What do you think is an under-researched area in the field? What do your colleagues think? What do your trainees or your teachers need? What are your trainees or your teachers' concerns, and what do you need to find out more to cope with the current situation in your context? And of course, if you do look into investigating your context, it's very important that you disseminate your data and share your findings with the world. This will help us grow as a field, and it will help us develop as professionals. One way to go is through academic journals, which are research-based and publish findings on language education, magazines and newsletters as well. There are plenty of IATEFL newsletters that do publish samples of research or whole research studies. Conference presentations, of course, this can also be done via IATEFL or any other organization that does support researchers or teacher researchers, teacher trainers, and managers. Conference proceedings, publications from conferences where you can elaborate on your research, research reports and workshops to stakeholders or policymakers, trying to send
have we lost Christina? Is it just me?
Yeah,
or
yeah.
I can't hear her anymore.
No, yeah, you're right. So let's
She's still in the meeting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Let me just text her.
okay. Bear with us, folks, technology. Hopefully Christina will be back shortly.
these tech things do happen.
Yeah, of course.
I don't know if Claire is still here, but I think I met Claire in 2015, and I was doing a talk at the English Australia conference, and it was a 45-minute talk. It was a workshop, really. And as I started, the computer in the room failed. So I had about 20 minutes in that workshop with no computer and no slides. It was a bit stressful.
Hey, we've all been there. It happens, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think
Absolutely.
teachers and English language teachers online particularly, you develop resilience, but working in different contexts when things don't happen like you were expecting, as Simon was talking about. I really admired his resilience there in those very stressful circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely, Claire.
But that's kind of like the fun bit of English language teaching, I think.
I don't know if everybody would call it fun.
Oh, look, the things, that get thrown at you sometimes, and what rabbits you have to pull out of your hat. You just think, yeah.
Yeah, that's very
We can
true.
do it.
Yeah, she's not in yet, but that's fine. We can just wait a little bit. Yeah, she doesn't seem to be logged in. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just having a look.
Yeah, probably.
Let me see if she sent me a message. She might have.
Yeah. By the way, this session will be followed by a discussion. So if you have ideas for our speakers, so maybe this is the time, to think about them. Yeah.
Plan B.
Well, it was on the schedule in any case, so it's all right, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Right.
It was, and I think it was for 1:20 UK time. So SIG. Yeah.
Okay. So sorry, I think I was here. Yeah. So I presented this part about the journals and of course newsletters, and I was going to say that there are quite a few newsletters, especially on teacher education. IATEFL also has a number of newsletters that we could share and disseminate our data. Podcasts even now, these are really popular nowadays, and a lot of people are going on podcasts and sharing their experience and their research or courses that they're offering, etc., etc. So this is also really valuable. Of course, it's a great way to stay informed and share your findings or share your work and your training experience or managing experiences, online conferences and webinars. Yeah, that was really it. I only had a couple of slides left, so it's a shame that I was cut off. But anyway, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And this is my contact information. If you'd like to get in touch and say hi, that would be great.
Wonderful. Thank you, Christina. So we have some time until the very end of our session that we've put aside for any questions to any of our speakers today. So that's for Simon, Claire, Lucie, Sandy, or Christina. And we had, I'm just looking at the chat box to see if there's anything from earlier this morning. I don't know if any of my co-hosts can see any other questions. I've just got one or two in a minute. Christina or Baha, Gerhard?
I think you can go ahead and start with the questions you have. In the meantime, you can invite the audience to ask questions if they already have not typed them in the chat box. Yeah.
So I think Claire has a question for Lucie.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So would you, do you have your question, Claire, or would you like me to read it?
That's Clare McGrath.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, definitely.
Always so many Claires.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry, I was just trying to think. Okay, yeah, I was curious about how you approached identifying talent with existing staff rather than just recruiting. And I think later, some of the things that you talked about, I could see would be able to be easily adapted and in fact were designed for that purpose. I love that idea about people writing some of their talents, putting it into the, the fishbowl, whatever, people identifying who that person was, finding out more about each other, and even, possibilities for people doing that where I describe, say, someone else's talents on that piece of paper. And then when people are guessing and then I reveal, oh, this is about that person, whether that person would have actually recognized what their talents were. Sometimes people are, not able to identify them. They're being a bit modest. They don't realize they actually have something special to contribute. But were there any other particular tactics you used with helping existing staff identify their talents, or for management and trainers to find out what those talents were if they hadn't already spotted them?
Yeah, I really like that idea of actually identifying other people's talents, because I think that as well, that's probably going to make, that it's going to give you more confidence as well in an area. So if somebody identifies one of your talents and, it says, I really like that, I think you get more confidence and then you just naturally become better at it. But yeah, I think there's kind of like the formal ways of finding out people's talents and the less formal ways of finding them out. So I think the formal ones are things like the appreciative inquiry, so to go on a kind of talent finding quest. Maybe when I think somebody mentioned it earlier as well, with observing. So maybe when you're observing teachers, kind of looking as well at what makes this teach. So, we know that our teachers are good, but what exactly makes them good, and breaking it down. So what talent is it that they have that makes them so good with working with, for example, children, and kind of then celebrating those talents and making everybody else aware of them as well. So maybe after, a round of kind of observations, maybe sharing some of the key talents in a teachers meeting so that everybody else can then kind of say, okay, well, I'd like to develop in that area. I'm going to go and watch this talented teacher lesson. Also in appraisals, that's the ideal time to do it, in engagement questionnaires, things like that. Yeah, exactly, Claire. I think with peer observations as well is a really great way. So, we quite often have, don't we, with peer observations, the kind of what would you like to steal? And I think sometimes maybe that's not shared as much. So maybe making sure that we really do share this. So, okay, that's great. Now, maybe somebody else wants to know about this. And also something that was mentioned earlier in the chat as well, I think, about the sometimes we get quite a lot of information about talents at the recruiting stage, but we don't pass it on. And this is something I'm guilty of as well, that, in an interview, lots of really interesting things can come out about talents that are non-teaching talents that could be used. So maybe sort of making an effort to connect departments. So whoever's doing the recruiting passes on this information to whoever is responsible for the training program, so that then that it's all connected and you're sort of maximizing those that information and the talents. I don't know if that makes sense, but did it answer the question, Claire?
Thank you so much, Lucie. Vicky's come on to the camera, switched her camera on. So maybe, Vicky, do you have a question that you'd like to ask?
I don't have a question. I just saw the idea of putting our cameras on and I thought it would be nice.
Oh, that's a lovely idea.
That's equally nice.
Yes.
So that we're not just talking to black screens. Okay, are there
Any
any
other
others? I'm
questions?
just
Yeah.
looking in the chat box as well. I can see that it's Claire that's written about the notice board to share talents as well. Sounds good.
Yeah, that worked quite well because it was an incidental space that people often pass through, even if they were people who are working, say, morning, afternoon, evening shifts.
Yeah.
And so it was just something that people would look at and think, oh yeah, and there were post-it notes there and somebody could add a post-it note to it and it just built. I was interested that people were talking about exams and so on for identifying talent. I wondered if any
Yes,
of
I
those
saw
people
that
wanted
too,
to talk
Claire.
about that.
Do you think by exams we can reveal the talents of people in general? But I'm not
What kind
sure.
of exams, what kind of
Yeah.
talents are thus revealed?
Are they talking about kind of like assessments in terms of like assessing ability to think in different ways and things like that? I wondered.
Possibly. It's written by Sangar Ibrahim. I don't know if you can come forward and just clarify that for us, so that perhaps Lucie or one of the others can answer. I'm not sure what you mean exactly by the word exams. Like you say, Lucie, is it an assessment?
Yeah, maybe he meant something like the Myers-Briggs sort of personality test or the team roles, things like that.
I was just thinking that. Yeah, that's true. They haven't come back with any further comments, but I mean, I've seen those types of tests, Lucie. I don't know whether it has a place in our world particularly. I don't know. I don't know what you think, but my husband has actually done some of those tests, and they're quite stressful when they're online because they're often time based, and it's a bit of thinking outside the box type of questions, and they're not the most pleasant experience from what I could see. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not a massive fan of the Myers-Briggs personality test, but I think the team roles one is quite interesting. I think you've got to take them with a pinch of salt, but I think that the team roles one where they're kind of, it gives you appreciation of different personalities within a team. So yeah, I guess it kind of depends, but I do like just talking to people. I think is the easiest way to find out.
Well, to make a comment, what I think Cotterill posted, going back to some presentation, maybe failures can be shared. I think if we think about research, sometimes people tend to go, I've got a research question, I'm going to go out and collect data and prove my hypothesis. And often things that gets published makes us feel like you're only getting something published if you actually found what you wanted to find. When you find no connection, it doesn't get published. And I wonder if that's not necessarily true, but I wonder if that kind of thinking doesn't impact our approach to let me share all the things I have found rather than the things I have not found, the things I've failed at. So I don't know if Gabrielle wants to add something, but I mean, I think sharing failures and what we learn from it is actually a very good idea. The question is, how do we do it?
Absolutely. I think that idea of, I think I agree with you, Gerhard, about the idea that research nearly always is quite skewed in that respect because it's self-selecting in all kinds of ways. In the same way that most of the time, the way that we as individuals publish as professionals as well, we tend to do those things. I think that. But yes, you're absolutely right also about the idea that failure can become, I don't know, do you want to call it self-indulgent or self-aggrandizing as well? So that, I mean, it needs to be incorporated in a much wider worldview. I think that I suppose I got a nice message from somebody asking a question about this, about talking about ideas of blame and praise. The idea that maybe it's quite useful to just see that in whatever environment we're in, that the connection just happens. It doesn't necessarily require blame or praise. That's just a layer of analysis that we put on top of it, really. Maybe it is interesting sometimes to just see what is happening in terms of the connections between things. So, for example, failure is often just a lack of connection, where I wanted a connection to happen and it didn't happen, or an organization wanted connections to happen. So, for example, you might have a school that's trying to sell products or sell courses or whatever, and it doesn't happen, and that can be seen as a failure. But actually, there are all kinds of reasons why that might happen. And then in that respect, analyzing what that failure means becomes a very interesting thing to do. So it goes back to what I was talking about earlier on. But thank you for that particular question. I don't know whether I should say who asked it, but they were talking about, why did I see that my inattention or my deviance, if you remember something that was kind of included, why would that be blameworthy when I was doing something that the company had agreed for me to do? It's because there was always the possibility that I'd missold it to them, maybe, or that maybe I hadn't made it as clear as I could have made it, or maybe that even I was so carried away with something that I thought was a wonderful idea that I misled them in some way. And also, if you're going to do something that takes years and years and years to come to fruition, inattention is a natural thing that will happen. And what we notice that happens in real life is sometimes the moment when you lose your focus is the moment that's the most important bit, when you needed it. So, I mean, it doesn't really answer a question. It's just talking about what life is like. I mean, we need to incorporate this into our thinking, because if we try to see that it's something that we're going to solve with the system, we're going to miss some of the important stuff. So that's kind of it, really. But I am interested. I am interested in people's failures. Always like to know. I'm sorry, Claire. I didn't mean to disturb you.
No. Sorry. One of the things I picked up from your talk was about looking at situations, not looking at systems and processes, and that rings a lot of bells.
I think I mean personally, so a lot of what I was doing today, I didn't actually say some of what I was based on because time was short. But if anybody's interested in this kind of thing, there's a French philosopher called Gilles Deleuze, who's a very interesting person, and he talks about the idea of lines of flight, which is basically that, as Claire said, thank you for picking up on it. In every situation, there are connections that make the situation, but there are also connections that are potential, that come out of every situation as well. And so one of the reasons why we can't just see things in fairly limited, systematic ways is because not only do we fail to understand things, but we also cut off all of the potential. And oh yeah, sure, I will. So yeah, these are very, very difficult things for us to get our heads around and to manage, but and it's very difficult to give very practical examples of these sometimes, but they are worth finding out about, I think. So lines of flight. There you go. Yeah, very interesting stuff. But I was just going to say that I am fascinated in other people's failures as well. So always cathartic to share them with others. So I'm always really interested to hear when something went horribly wrong for somebody else as well.
May I make a suggestion? If you don't have any other questions, how are we doing in terms of time, Christina? Do we have?
We have around 19 minutes, plenty of time.
Okay. So all the talks, they were fascinating, and I made some notes, and I would like to share my takeaways from today's presentations, if I may, so that can be like a wrap up and a summary of the day. Then time remaining, I would be very interested to hear about our audience's takeaways from today's session. So if you can just type in the chat panel one or two takeaways from today's presentations, that would be wonderful. So thank you very much, Simon Cox, for getting us to, for encouraging us to embrace our failure and mistakes. I think it's so important to embrace them and to make them a learning lesson. So that was fascinating. And the quotation that you used in one of your slides, managers are thinking about the failure the wrong way. That was my takeaway. I think that was the punchline. It had a very important message there. So thank you for sharing this. And following Simon, we listened to Claire's wonderful presentation about specifically for professional development. In her talk, she covered all possible aspects that we need to take into consideration when designing a professional development program. She talked about different tools, platforms that can be used in delivering a PD program. And she also introduced us to a new, for some of us, it is new, professional group on Facebook, Aus ELT. So thank you very much for this, Claire. I'm going to be a member as soon as possible. And then Lucie talked about talent management. And the entire time I was listening to her talk, I was thinking, there's so much untapped potential in every institution, in every organization. So you talked us through the stages of identifying and managing talent in any institution. So I think that was very, very valuable. Thank you very much. Then Sandy talked about the importance of effective communication. My takeaways, she focused on things like they may look like very minor details, but they can be extremely important, like even sending an agenda of a meeting, writing an email, giving feedback to people. Sometimes in our day-to-day working, we are taking things for granted and we are not paying attention to the importance of such minor details. So that was very valuable, I think. So thank you very much, Sandy. And the last speaker, Christina, don't we ever need so much support these days? So from both management perspective and training perspective, I think you gave very important messages. Also leadership perspective. My takeaways, you emphasized self-care and teachers' well-being from the trainer's perspective. I think training perspective, I think this is extremely important these days. We keep hearing more and more about well-being, teachers' well-being and trainers' well-being and managers' well-being. I think that was very valuable. And from leadership perspective, on one of your slides, you had appreciate and value individuals. I think that was a very, very important message. And also, after giving those important messages, you focused on the research aspect also, and you encouraged us to reflect on our teaching experience, training experience, or management experience, and then maybe transform this into some kind of research and disseminate in a variety of ways that you suggested. So lots of takeaways. It was like I said, I knew this was going to happen. I knew it was going to be a very professionally rewarding experience. For me, it has been extremely professionally rewarding. So I would love to see other people's takeaways. Or if you can, if you want, you can switch on your microphone and you can take it away. So thank you, our speakers. That was wonderful. Okay, we are all reading the messages now. Lucie, guess what? I made a presentation once and I did use the word in my presentation online.
Good. I'm always wary about whether to use it, but it is natural language, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think both Claire and I now want to know what was the word.
I do like the fact that you've got the ability to chat privately in PD like this. In some places, they have switched that off, and also that you're able to do file sharing. You know, that makes a lot of sense to me. Okay. Got it. It's very nice to be able to, you know, use the affordances within Zoom to the full extent. Though I noticed I couldn't copy the chat box. What am I doing wrong?
I noticed that as well, and I couldn't share my screen earlier on. So I don't know whether they've changed things a little bit in Zoom.
I think I think it might be IATEFL, because I think we had the same issue with another one, and they said something at the time about it was for privacy, for data or something. Is that right, Christina?
You're right, Lucie. Yes, yes, it's because of that. Yeah.
Okay, because if there are two ways you can go down to the, you know, the dots, but you can also usually do Control A and then Control C. So Control A to highlight it all, and then Control C, and then you can copy and paste, and that's not working. So there you go. Never mind.
I know mine was only a reminder to switch off microphones. It was just like the blandest of messages in a sense. So, you know, for copying purposes. But anyway, it was just to kind of keep the messages the same. But yeah, Zoom does change from time to time, and so it's fair. But if you say it's an IATEFL account,
and for privacy, that makes sense.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
At least you could click on all the links immediately and copy them and paste them that way. So that was great.
I have thought of something as a kind of a takeaway. I know, Simon, you mentioned the Harvard Business Review, and I just wondered if that's, I guess it's an online, you said it was a free resource,
Yeah,
and it's online, is it? Do you need to just sign up with it? Because it sounds like a really good read, actually.
It's Harvard Business Review's got lots of merits. One of the merits is the fact that it's more of a magazine than a journal. So it's good academics, but they write in a more natural style rather than an academic paper style. So it's not peer reviewed, but it's written by good people. You can sign up for free online, and I think they give you, I don't know, is it like access twice per month for free or something like that? Which, let's face it, when it comes to management theory, you're probably not going to need any more than 2 a year. So yeah, Harvard Business Review is great, but you could, I mean, you also find similar things in Forbes.
Thanks, Claire, for the link. That's cool. Yeah. You find that you, I've got obviously like my browser open as well. I was just copying the links, and I've got plenty of reading for the rest of the weekend. Thank you.
Would you like us? Are we sharing our PowerPoints for other people? Because all of my links are in the PowerPoint, so you're quite welcome to them.
I just file shared mine as a PDF. That was the fastest way to do it, because I don't think it gets emailed out to everybody.
Yeah, it's quite hard.
Correct.
Okay, I'll save it. I'll leave it on my LinkedIn page anyway, so you can go for it there as well, if you want any of those links.
Brilliant, thank you, Simon.
I wanted to ask how many people actually, so because a lot of the stuff we've been talking about today has been COVID and online related. How many people are looking forward to the hopefully face-to-face of IATEFL in Belfast this year?
Hopefully. Yeah. Fingers crossed, we'll make it. Yeah, you never know. You never know.
No, we don't, but let's hope so.
Yeah.
On that note, do you want to quickly talk about your PCE? Then I can talk about the LAMSIG one, and we could wrap up.
Speaking of Belfast, hopefully. We would love to see you among us on the pre-conference event, which will be on the 16th of May. By the way, Gerard, it will be my birthday, PCE. So I'm looking forward to that. So if you haven't signed up yet, we would be very happy to see you among us on the 16th of May on our pre-conference event. On the slide here, you can see our speakers for the pre-conference event. It will be full of engaging activities, lots of interaction between the speakers and the audience, and lots of tasks. Yeah, Gerard?
Yeah, we also have our next Teachers Lounge next month for TEdSIG members. We are looking at taking a closer look at our PCE day and what the speakers are bringing to the day and what will be discussed. So if you want to find out a bit more about the PCE itself, our next Teachers Lounge, which is on the 25th of March at 5 o'clock UK time. It will go out on social media shortly, notice of that. So I hope to see some of you there.
So Teachers Lounge will be online, of course, but our pre-conference event, hopefully, fingers and toes crossed, it will be face-to-face in Belfast.
Well, the LAMSIG one, I'm only going to make available right now. The plenary speaker will be Adrian Underhill. He's going to be talking about how we learn from a future that hasn't happened yet. Obviously, a lot of what we're going to be looking at is building organizational and sector-wide resilience. I think the last 2 years have been tough for a lot of organizations, so that's the focus of what we're doing. Face-to-face in Belfast on Bahar's birthday. I look forward to seeing you at either of the two, to be honest, whether it's the Teacher Training Education SIG or Leadership Management SIG BC. We're looking forward to seeing you there. And thanks for being here today. And also thanks for the speakers. I'm quite happy with how it went. And I'm assuming that the Bahar and your committee would be feeling the same.
Yes.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's been a great event, and we thank to all of our speakers. Great talks, indeed.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think it's time to say goodbye to each other now. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you very
Enjoy
much.
the rest of your weekend, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
And happy birthday
Thanks,
again,
everyone.
Gerhard.
Bye.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
happy
thank you.
birthday.
Cheers.
I'm probably going to go out for a few beers now.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.